Every disappearance has a final moment of certainty. A last sighting, a last call, a last place someone was known to be. The last known tells real true crime cases using only the facts.
They are not long, the days of wine and roses. Out of a misty dream, our path emerges for a while, then closes within a dream.
Wow. That's incredibly heavy.
Yeah.
And beautiful in a really dark way.
It is, isn't it? That's a stanza from a poem by a guy named Ernest Dowson. And I didn't just pull that out of, some dusty old book to be dramatic or set a mood.
No, there's a reason for it.
There's a very specific reason. That piece of poetry has a tangible physical connection to the case we're looking at today. It was found hauntingly close to the source material, close to the tragedy itself. Mm-hmm. And it perfectly frames the absolute heartbreak of a life cut short. A life that has been, let's be honest, mythologized, exploited, and frankly completely misunderstood for nearly 80 years.
We are talking, of course, about Elizabeth Short.
The woman the world knows as the Black Dahlia.
It's the ultimate American cold case.
Yeah.
Or at least that's how we think of it. Yeah. It's a cold case.
Exactly. The date is January 15th, 1947. Her body is found in a vacant lot in Leimert Park, Los Angeles. And the state of the body.
It's the stuff of absolute nightmares. Bisected, posed, drained of blood. It's the image that launched 1,000 noir films.
Right. And that's the thing. Usually when you hear a podcast or watch a documentary on this, what do you get? You get the gore. You get the noir atmosphere, the trench coats, the shadows.
You get the femme fatale image, this mysterious woman in black, prowling the dark streets of Hollywood.
You get the caricature.
Yes. You get the Black Dahlia, not Elizabeth Short.
Yeah.
You get a symbol, not a human being.
Exactly. And our mission today in this deep dive is to pivot hard, and I mean hard, away from that sensationalism.
Right.
We are going to dig into a stack of sources that quite honestly blew my mind. We are not looking at the tabloid headlines from 1947 that were just trying to sell papers.
Right. No, we are looking at the original police files.
Which is a huge distinction.
A massive distinction.
Yeah.
We're looking at district attorney documents from 1949 and 1950. These are files that were buried for decades. We're also looking at the extensive, relentless investigation by Steve Hodo.
And for those who don't know, he was a former LAPD homicide detective, so he knows this world inside and out.
Right. And he didn't just write a book and move on. He spent decades dismantling the accepted narrative of this case, piece by piece, using his skills as a detective.
And this is the part that, I'm not kidding, it kept me up last night reading the prep material. We are going to examine what I can only describe as the smoking gun.
Yeah.
We have transcripts.
Actual verbatim transcripts, not summaries, not recollections.
Yeah.
The real words.
From electronic surveillance bugs that were planted in the home of the prime suspect, we are going to read the words of the police officers who are sitting in a room listening to a murder suspect in real time.
This is the stuff that usually gets redacted or lost or, conveniently destroyed. Mm-hmm. But thanks to some very careful archiving by one specific investigator who just refused to let it go, we have it.
So, if you think you know the Black Dahlia case, I promise you don't know this part of it. We're going to debunk the biggest myths, we're going to humanize the victim, and we're going to walk you through the audio tapes that, in my opinion, solve the case.
And it's not just a murder mystery. It's really a journey into the dark heart of 1950s Los Angeles corruption. It explains why the case stayed cold. It wasn't that they didn't know, it's that they couldn't prosecute.
Okay, let's unpack this. And we absolutely have to start with the victim herself, Elizabeth Short. Because before she was a headline, before she was a corpse in a vacant lot, she was a person.
Mm-hmm.
And the sources we have do a really, really good job of stripping away that barfly image.
That is the most important correction we need to make right at the top.
Right.
The media at the time, and history since then, has painted her as this vamp.
Right.
The narrative was that she was a woman of the night, someone who prowled the bars of Hollywood, maybe a prostitute, maybe just in a loose.
Yeah.
It was textbook victim blaming 101.
The old virgin tramp narrative, or the drifter who got what was coming to her. It's disgusting.
It is. But the files we have, the actual witness statements from people who knew her, they paint a picture of a much more tragic and shy figure.
Let's go back a bit into her history because this is so important for context. In high school, she was known as Medford's Deanna Durbin.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for our listeners who might not be experts on 1940s cinema, and I'll admit I had to look this up to get the full picture, who was Deanna Durbin?
Oh, Deanna Durbin was massive. She was, I think, the highest paid female star in the world in 1947. She was a singer, an actress. Mm-hmm. The quintessential American sweetheart.
So like a Judy Garland type?
Think of a mix between Judy Garland and a young Elizabeth Taylor. She was that big. She was wholesome. She was beautiful. She had this incredible voice. She was Hollywood royalty.
So Elizabeth Short was compared to the biggest star in the world. Was it because she had this golden singing voice? Was she a performer?
No, and the source is pretty clear on that. She wasn't really a performer in that way. The comparison was purely physical.
Just her look.
Just her looks. She had that look, the jet black hair, the fair skin, the blue eyes. She carried herself with a certain cinematic quality. Even back in Medford, Massachusetts, she just had an aura about her.
And that beauty, that aura, it was recognized wherever she went. The sources mention that when she moved to California, she was voted the Camp Cook cutie in 1943.
Right. And this was when she was working at the Post Exchange, the PX at Camp Cook.
And just for clarity for everyone, the PX is essentially the retail store on a military base, right?
Correct. It's where soldiers go to buy cigarettes, snacks, magazines, toiletries, that sort of thing. So she was working the counter there, interacting with all these GIs.
So Camp Cook Cutie was a morale booster title.
Exactly. It sounds a little trivial now, maybe a bit sexist by our standards, but at the time, it meant she was popular. She was seen as a bright spot for the soldiers who were stationed there before they shipped out to war. She was a friendly face.
But here's the contrast that really struck me reading the files. We have this cutie title, which implies a kind of pinup girl vibe, but the manager of the PX, a woman named Inez Keeling, described her completely differently.
Yes, Keeling's quote is vital to understanding the real Elizabeth. She described her as, and I'm quoting here, one of the loveliest and most shy girls, won over at once by her innocence.
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 That is a word you never, ever hear in the noir retellings of the Black Dahlia.
Never. It doesn't fit the narrative. The myth requires her to be corrupted to justify the crime. But the reality, from people who actually knew her and worked with her, was that she was shy, she was polite, and she was. So she was struggling.
The struggle is the other big piece of the puzzle here. She had this reputation for beauty, absolutely, but also for extreme poverty. Friends noted she was often broke, often hungry. She wasn't living the high life in Hollywood. She was couch surfing and trying to get by.
And there was one specific detail from her roommate that it really stuck with me. It highlights how much she was struggling to keep up appearances, and honestly, it's just heartbreaking.
Is this the candle wax?
The candle wax, yeah. A roommate noted that Elizabeth would take actual candle wax, melt it down, and use it to fill the cavities in her teeth.
To hide the dark spots so people wouldn't see them when she smiled.
Yes. She couldn't afford a dentist. She had severe, painful dental issues. But she was so concerned with her appearance, with maintaining that Deanna Durbin dignity, that vanity, that she used hot wax to plug her own teeth before going out.
That is such a visceral detail. I mean, it makes my teeth hurt just thinking about it, but it also paints such a clear picture of her desperation.
It tells you everything you need to know about her desperation and her pride, all at once. She was trying to keep up appearances in a city, Los Angeles, that runs entirely on appearances while she was literally starving and in physical pain.
And speaking of appearances, let's talk about the name itself, the Black Dahlia.
The name that launched 1,000 headlines.
The common myth is that some cynical reporter came up with it to sell papers after she died. You know, that it was a press invention, something catchy for the bold print.
Which is the standard narrative you'll read in almost every book on the case. But the source material, the original files, they correct this. The name actually came from a drugstore.
Arnold Lander's drugstore in Long Beach.
Right. This was in mid-1946, months before she was killed. Elizabeth frequented the place. And you have to picture the scene. It's a 1940s drugstore, soda fountain, fluorescent lights, the whole thing.
And in walks Elizabeth Short.
Exactly. And she would come in wearing these black, often lacy clothes with her jet black hair piled high on her head. She stood out.
She struck a distinct silhouette. She was creating a character for herself.
She was. And the customers, the regular folks sitting at the counter drinking milkshakes, they started calling her the Black Dahlia.
It was a riff on the movie The Blue Dahlia, right? Which was out at the time.
Exactly. It starred Alan Ladd and Veronica Lake. It's a huge movie. So it was a pop culture reference. It was the meme of 1946.
And how did the press get it?
So this is where it gets really interesting regarding the investigation. A detective, Edward C. Boynton, a Long Beach cop, he knew this nickname while she was alive.
He knew her personally.
He knew of her. She was a local figure. After the murder, when all the reporters were scrambling for a hook and asking cops for any little detail, Boynton mentioned it, probably just casually. Oh yeah, down at the drugstore, people called her the Black Dahlia.
And the source says the reporters headed for the phones like a covey of quail.
And a legend was branded right there.
Yeah.
But it's so important to remember. The name wasn't an insult initially. It was a recognition of her unique style. But when she died, it completely stripped her of her humanity. She stopped being Elizabeth Short from Massachusetts, and she became a noir trope.
So we have this young, struggling, beautiful, shy woman. She's in LA. She's trying to make it, but she's barely hanging on. And then she disappears. This brings us to what I think is the biggest myth of the entire case: the missing week.
This is the cornerstone of the mystery for most amateur sleuths and even for a lot of historians. The narrative goes, Elizabeth Short was dropped off at the Biltmore Hotel on January 9th, 1947, and she vanished from the face of the earth.
Yay.
Until her body was found on January 15th.
A 7-day void. And the theory that usually comes with that is that she was kidnapped immediately, held captive, and tortured for a week straight.
It implies a dungeon somewhere. It implies she was tied up, hidden from the world for days on end. It turns the killer into this kind of long-term sadistic captor.
But Steve Hodell's investigation, based on the original police files, not the newspapers, the file style, completely demolishes this.
Oh, completely. We are looking at a timeline here that documents 12 individual witness sightings during this so-called missing week.
12 sightings, that's not a missing person. That's a person who is out and about.
Exactly. And these aren't just, random people claiming they saw Elvis at a gas station.
Yeah.
These aren't reliability zero sightings.
These aren't crackpots.
No. 6 of these 12 witnesses personally knew her. They knew Elizabeth Short by name and by face. They weren't mistaking her for someone else.
Okay, let's check the timeline the sources provide, because this changes the entire nature of the crime. So January 9, she is at the Biltmore.
Right. A hotel employee, a Mr. Studholme, sees her there until about 10 p.m. She leaves. The notes say she possibly left with an unknown person, or was maybe signaled by someone from the lobby doors.
Okay, that's the part we know. But the story usually ends there for a week.
But it doesn't. Between January 9 and January 14, there are 11 more sightings. She is seen in Hollywood. She is seen in downtown LA. She is seen at bars, at cafes. She is moving around the city.
This changes the whole profile of the crime. If she's being seen in public, she is not being held in a dungeon.
Precisely. She is likely with someone she knows or someone she trusts, or maybe she's just drifting between places trying to figure out her next move. But she is not bound and gagged somewhere. She is, to some extent, free.
But the most crucial sighting, the one that really just makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up, is the very last one, January 14th.
This is the sighting by Meryl McBride.
And Meryl McBride wasn't just some random pedestrian. Who was she?
She was an LAPD policewoman.
Okay, so that gives this sighting immense credibility.
Absolutely. McBride is trained to observe. She's not going to mistake a random woman for someone she is observing. She knows what she's looking at.
And she sees Elizabeth exiting a bar in downtown LA. But she's not alone. Who is she with?
She is with 2 males and a female, a group of 3 other people.
So it's a social setting.
It appears to be. And McBride actually stops her. She either recognizes her or just senses something is off. The report isn't clear, but maybe Elizabeth looked distressed or disheveled. She approaches her and asks, "Are you okay?"
And Elizabeth Short looks at this police officer and says, "What?"
She says, "Yes, I'm going to meet my father at the Greyhound bus depot."
I'm going to meet my father. Now, knowing what we know about her relationship with her dad, that's a huge red flag.
It's almost certainly a lie. Her father, Cleo Short, had kicked her out years prior. He wanted absolutely nothing to do with her. So this was a cover story. She was deflecting the police officer. She was telling her, "Don't worry about me. Everything's fine. Move along."
She didn't want the cop to intervene. She was trying to handle it herself.
Right. And think about the timing here. This sighting is on January 14th.
And the body is found on the 15th.
This sighting is just 10 hours before the coroner's estimated time of death.
10 hours.
She wasn't missing for a week. She was alive, in public, in the company of these people. 2 men and a woman, less than half a day before she was killed.
It suggests she walked into her death. It wasn't a violent snatch and grab from the street a week prior. It was very likely a social interaction that turned horrific.
Yeah. It creates a picture of entrapment. She thought she was safe. She thought she was with friends, or at least acquaintances she trusted. And she waved off the one person, Officer McBride, who could have saved her life.
That is the ultimate sliding doors moment of this entire case. If she had just said to McBride, "No, I'm not okay, I need help," history is completely different.
Absolutely. A different world.
So if she wasn't kidnapped on the 9th, who is she with? Who are these two men and a woman? This brings us to the investigation and the characters surrounding her. We have to talk about the White Knight, Robert Red Manley.
Poor Red Manley. He really does play the role of the innocent bystander who gets dragged into history just because he was trying to be a nice guy.
He was the man who drove her from San Diego up to Los Angeles on that fateful trip to the Biltmore. He's the one who dropped her off.
So he was the first suspect, naturally. The last person seen rule always applies. He dropped her off, so he must have done it. The police focus on him immediately.
But he was cleared really quickly, right?
Very quickly. He passed a polygraph test, which the LAPD relied on very heavily back then. And critically, he had a rock-solid alibi.
Where was he?
He was back in San Francisco with his wife when the murder occurred. He was hundreds of miles away. He couldn't have done it.
Okay, so he's cleared. But there is this fascinating detail in the source material regarding a 1950 re-interview of Red Manley. This is years after the murder. The district attorney's office is taking another hard look at the case.
This is where you have to put on your detective hat. I mean, you really have to look at what the police didn't ask as much as what they did ask. It's all about negative evidence.
Okay, lay it out for us. This felt like a real Sherlock Holmes moment when I was reading it.
So a guy named L.T. Frank Jemison, he's the lead DA investigator, very sharp guy. He sits down with Manley in 1950. He starts rattling off this long list of names. He asks, did Elizabeth ever mention Dr. Morris? Did she ever mention a Dr. Scott, a Dr. Brooks?
So just a long list of doctors.
A long list of doctors. He's clearly trying to find a connection to a medical professional. Because remember, the body was bisected with surgical precision.
They knew the killer had medical training.
Exactly. They knew the killer had medical skill. But there is one name that is conspicuously absent from that list. Jemison explicitly does not ask if she mentioned Dr. Hodel.
Why? I mean, if Hodel was a suspect, wouldn't that be the first name you'd ask? Hey, does she know George Hodel?
It's the opposite. The analysis suggests that by 1950, Dr. George Hill Hodel was already their prime suspect.
Their only suspect, really.
Jemison didn't ask Manley about Hodel because he didn't want to tip his hand. He didn't want to reveal who they were really targeting.
So they were treating Hodel completely differently than the other 300-plus suspects they had looked at.
Precisely. If you ask a witness about a random doctor, it's just general information gathering. If you ask about your main target, you risk the witness talking to the press, or worse, talking to the suspect or an associate. They were circling the shark, and they didn't want to splash the water.
Wow, that is fascinating. It shows they were building a specific case against Hodel long before the public ever knew his name was connected to this.
It confirms he wasn't just one of many. By 1950, he was the one.
Before we get to the shark himself, Dr. Hodel, let's quickly touch on the other characters Manley might have known about or who were in the police file. There's a guy named Mark Hansen.
The theater impresario. He was a, somewhat shady figure in the Hollywood nightlife scene. Elizabeth stayed at his house for a while.
What was their relationship?
The sources say he was possessive. He wanted her to stop seeing other men, but for her, he was a means to an end. She needed a roof over her head. He wanted a beautiful young girlfriend on his arm. It was a very transactional Hollywood relationship.
And then there's her father, Cleo Short. We mentioned him earlier.
Such a tragic relationship. She came all the way out west to live with him in 1942. He basically kicked her out for being lazy and not cooking for him.
For a teenager who just moved across the country to be with him.
It was incredibly harsh. And then when she died,
Yeah.
his reaction was just. It was as cold as ice. He refused to identify the body. He refused to come to the funeral. He told the press, quote, "I want nothing to do with this."
That is just
Okay.
it. It really emphasizes how utterly alone she was. She had these men in her life, Manley the Good Samaritan, Hansen the user, her father the absentee, but no one who was truly looking out for her.
Except perhaps in a very twisted way, the man she was trying to impress or get help from in those final days. Which brings us to the doctor.
Dr. George Hill Hodel, part 3 of our deep dive, the prime suspect.
This is where the story shifts from a murder mystery to a full-blown conspiracy thriller.
Okay, let's set the scene. It's February 1950. The DA and the LAPD have formed a secret task force. They are convinced Hodel is their guy. So on February 15, they execute a very bold and very illegal move. They break into Dr. Hodel's home.
The Selden House. It's also known as the Franklin House. If you've ever seen photos of it, you know it. It's that distinctive Mayan temple-looking house in Hollywood.
It looks like a fortress.
It does. It has this inner courtyard. It's beautiful, but it's imposing. And the police break in and they plant microphones in the bedroom, in the living areas. They bug the entire place.
Now, some context here is really important. Hodel was already on their radar for something else entirely, right?
Yes. The incest of his 14-year-old daughter, Tamar. He had actually been acquitted of that charge in a very controversial trial, but the police clearly didn't believe he was innocent. They kept digging, and that digging led them to suspect him of murder.
And thank goodness they did, because what they captured on those tapes, well, it's the smoking gun we promised at the top of the show.
And we should issue a warning here. This content is disturbing. We are going to be reading from the summaries and the direct quotes from the logs of the police officers who were listening to these tapes live as it happened.
Okay. February 18th, 1950. This is just 3 days after the bugs are planted. At 8:20 p.m., what did the officers hear?
The officers logged the sound of a woman screaming.
A scream coming from inside the house.
Then 5 minutes later, at 8:25 p.m., the log says, and I'm quoting, "Sounds of 2 men went down steps and entered the basement and began digging."
Let's just pause there. A scream. 2 men. The basement. And then digging.
It's a sequence of events that implies only a few things, and none of them are good. You don't scream and then start gardening in the basement at 8:30 at night.
It sounds like an assault and the disposal of something or someone.
Precisely. And then Dr. Hodel's voice is captured on the wire. He says, quote, "Realized there was nothing I could do. Put a pillow over her head and cover her with a blanket. Expired at 12:39.
Expired at 12:39. That's not how a normal person talks.
No, that is a physician's terminology. He isn't saying she died. He is calling a time of death. It's clinical. It's completely detached. He's documenting it like a medical procedure.
He mentions putting a pillow over her head.
Which aligns with suffocation or silencing a victim.
But then comes the bombshell. The absolute bombshell. Hodel is talking to a visitor. The source identifies him as a baron, possibly an associate named Ernst von Heringa, a guy with a German accent. And Hodel says this, and I'm going to read it verbatim from the transcript because it gave me chills.
Go ahead.
He says, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead."
Just stop right there. Let that sink in for a second. Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia.
It sounds like a taunt, like he's bragging.
It is a taunt. People who have tried to defend Hodel, and there are fewer of them now, they often say, oh, he was just speaking hypothetically, he was joking around. But you have to look at the second half of that sentence.
They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead.
That is not a hypothetical. That is a statement of fact, and it's a threat. Who was the secretary?
A woman named Ruth Spalding.
And what happened to her?
She died of a drug overdose back in 1945.
2 years before the Black Dahlia murder. But Hodel is linking them. He is saying, the person who knew what I did is gone. He's suggesting that his secretary knew something, maybe about his illegal activities, maybe she was a victim herself, and that she is conveniently gone. Later in the tapes, he actually says, maybe I did kill my secretary.
So he is effectively confessing to 2 murders in one single breath. He's admitting he silenced a key witness. And he feels untouchable regarding the Dahlia murder because the primary link, the secretary, is dead.
It's the sheer arrogance of a man who believes he is smarter than the police. And frankly, for a long time he was. He's bragging to his friend the Baron.
It's the confidence of a serial killer. And the audio snippets, they don't stop there. He talks about corrupt connections.
And this is absolutely crucial for understanding why he wasn't arrested immediately. Hodel brags on the tape, this is the best payoff I've seen between law enforcement agencies.
The best payoff I've seen. He is literally complimenting the efficiency of the bribery system in Los Angeles.
He mentions Power, which is possibly a reference to the district attorney at the time, Joseph Power. And he talks about checking his connections. He is basically auditing his network of bribes to make sure it's holding up under the pressure of this new investigation.
He's not just a killer, he's a criminal entrepreneur. And he explicitly admits to other crimes on these tapes. On March 20th, then, he is recorded discussing an abortion ring.
Yes, he refers to them by the medical term DNC, dilation, and curettement. He tells the woman on the tape that he has done lots of them.
And we have to remember, abortion was illegal and highly prosecuted at this time. This confirms he was operating a criminal medical enterprise out of his home.
And critically, it confirms he had the surgical tools and the skill set. A DNC requires specific surgical instruments, the very same type of instruments that the coroner said were likely used to bisect Elizabeth Short's body.
The bisection wasn't a clumsy, violent act. It was done by someone who knew anatomy. It wasn't a hacksaw job.
Exactly. The coroner called it a hemicorporectomy. He cut cleanly between the second and third lumbar vertebrae. He knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't an act of rage. It was a skilled dissection.
There is one more connection I want to bring up here that ties Hodel directly to Elizabeth's psychology, the Chicago badge.
Ah, yes. This helps explain the why. Why did she go with him? Why would this young, beautiful woman be hanging out with this much older, sinister doctor?
Elizabeth Short reportedly told several friends she was seeing a man who had a Chicago police badge. She was impressed by it, or maybe a little intimidated by it. It was a big deal to her.
And it turns out Dr. Hodel had a connection to a famous Chicago lipstick murder case from that era. He used it as a ruse. He would pretend to be working undercover for the authorities investigating these high-profile crimes.
So he poses as an authority figure, a Chicago cop.
And that explains why Elizabeth might have gone with him willingly. Why she might have been seen with him in public in those final days. She thought she was with someone safe, or maybe someone exciting, who was on the right side of the law. She thought she was on the inside of something.
It fits the psychology of a predator perfectly. Deception, allure of authority, and then isolation.
He lured her in with a story of safety and importance, and then he sprung the trap.
So let's step back. The police are listening to all of this. They hear the digging, they hear the confession, they hear the bribery talk, they hear about the illegal abortions. Why in the world didn't they kick down the door?
That is the million-dollar question. And the answer is likely the very thing Hodel was bragging about on the tapes. Corruption.
Part 4, the escape and the cover-up. Because Hodel doesn't get arrested, he gets spooked.
The transcripts show the exact moment the investigation starts to fall apart. Hodel starts becoming suspicious of his own phone, of his own house.
March 4, 1950. Hodel answers the phone, and he's heard telling the caller, "Don't say anything over the phone, it is tapped."
He mentions hearing feedback on the line. Echoes. You know, the bugging technology of 1950 wasn't exactly stealthy. He heard the clicks. He heard his own voice bouncing back at him. He knew.
He starts speaking in code after that, or he leaves the house to have important conversations. The net is closing, but he can feel the threads.
And the surveillance then captures him planning his exit. And this isn't a panic. It's a very strategic withdrawal.
He discusses going to Mexico. He mentions setting up a sanitarium scheme in Sonora.
A sanitarium which was likely just a front for his illegal practices, or maybe just a safe house to lay low. He's setting up his landing pad before he jumps.
He also talks about getting girls to find out what the police know.
He is using his network-likely women he has compromised or controls through his abortion practice to counter-surveil the police. He is running his own intelligence operation against the LAPD.
And then the final entry in the log, March 27, 1950. The house is empty. Dr. George Hodel has fled.
He's gone. He crosses the border into Mexico. And the official investigation just stops. It goes cold.
But wait a minute. If they had these tapes, why didn't they issue an arrest warrant? Why didn't they work with authorities to drag him back from Mexico? He confessed to murder on a police wiretap.
And this brings us to the lost files.
The official LAPD recordings of these wiretaps disappeared.
Destroyed. Or lost, conveniently. The official record was scrubbed clean.
But L.T. Jemison, the investigator we mentioned earlier, the one who so carefully didn't ask Red Manley about Hodel, he was smart.
He was a careful cop. Good cop. He kept a personal copy of all these transcripts. He locked them in a bank vault. He essentially kept a second set of books.
And that is what Steve Hodel, the son, found decades later in Jemison's personal effects after he passed away. If Jemison hadn't hoarded these files, we would never know about this. Suppose and I did kill the Black Dahlia comment. We would never know about the digging in the basement.
And the transcripts reveal why the investigation was shut down. High-ranking officials in the LAPD and the DA's office likely killed the case. Why? Because Hodel mentioned the payoffs on tape.
The best payoff I've seen.
Think about it. If they prosecute Hodel for murder, that tape gets played in open court. It becomes public record. And if that tape gets played, Hodel exposes the entire bribery ring that reached the highest levels of the LAPD and the DA's office.
So he was a walking hand grenade. To prosecute him was to destroy themselves.
Exactly. If he goes down, he takes the chief of police or the DA down with him. They couldn't risk it.
So it was a cover-up, not necessarily to protect Hodel the murderer, but to protect the corrupt system that Hodel had bought into. He was too radioactive to prosecute.
So they let him go. They let a man who they heard digging in his basement after a woman screamed, "Just leave the country and live out his life."
It creates a picture of justice that is completely transactional. Elizabeth Short's justice was traded for the reputation and freedom of the city's top officials.
That is the heartbreaking reality of it.
Before we wrap up, there are a few loose ends in these transcripts that we need to connect. Because Hodel didn't act entirely alone, or at least he had people around him who knew. Part 5. The Unknown Woman.
All right, let's go back to that January 14th sighting. Policewoman McBride sees Elizabeth with 2 men and a woman.
And then we go to the tapes from February 18th. A woman is heard screaming in the basement. But Hodel is also heard talking to another woman during these events, someone who seems to be an accomplice.
The transcripts suggest this could have been his ex-wife, Dorothy Hodel.
Steve Hodel's mother.
Yes, the transcripts show that even after their divorce, she was still in contact with George. She was feeding him information about the investigation. She was, at the very least, complicit in protecting him.
So the woman in the group sighting could have been someone from Hodel's inner circle, someone used to make Elizabeth feel safe, a female accomplice.
Exactly. A woman makes the whole situation feel less threatening. If 2 strange guys approach you, you might run. If you see a couple and a friend, you might stay for a drink. It's a classic predator tactic.
And there's one more woman mentioned in the files, Lillian Lenarak.
This is a really tragic side story that just corroborates Hodel's brutality and his methods. Lillian was another witness, or possibly another victim, and the transcripts mention a staged suicide attempt involving her.
A staged suicide? What does that mean?
Hodel is heard on the tapes talking about her being drugged and having her wrists cut at his house.
He did this to her.
The implication is he set it all up. He wanted to discredit her as a witness. If she ever went to the police to talk about what she saw at his house, they would look at her record and say, oh, this woman is unstable. She tried to kill herself. They wouldn't believe her testimony against the prominent Dr. Hodel.
It's gaslighting with a scalpel. It's psychological warfare.
It shows his modus operandi. He controls the narrative, he controls the bodies, and he controls the minds of the women around him.
So what does this all mean? Let's bring it home. We have walked through the myths, the investigation, the tapes, and the cover-up.
When you synthesize all of this new evidence, the Black Dahlia case looks very, very different than the movie version.
First, the murder of Elizabeth Short was not a random act by some drifter.
No. She was a targeted victim of a highly intelligent, highly connected, and deeply sadistic predator.
Second, the missing week wasn't missing at all.
Not at all. She was in L.A., she was interacting with Hodel's circle, she was seen, she was alive, she walked into that trap.
And third, and this is the most important takeaway for me, the case wasn't unsolved.
Not in the traditional sense. The investigators knew who did it. They had a confession on tape. They knew the murder weapon was his surgical skill. They had witness corroboration putting her in his circle. They had it all.
It wasn't unsolved. It was unprosecuted.
Unprosecuted because of corruption, unprosecuted because of the convenient death of his secretary, and unprosecuted because Hodel was allowed to flee to protect the police department's own dark secrets.
It leaves you with such a heavy feeling. It shifts the blame from some mysterious, shadowy killer to the very institutions that were supposed to protect people like her.
It should leave you angry. It certainly makes me angry every time I read these files.
I want to leave you, our listener, with one final thought, a provocative thought for you to carry around today.
Go on.
Think about those police officers, the ones sitting in that surveillance van or that listening post on the night of February 18th, 1950. They have headphones on, they're probably drinking lukewarm coffee, taking notes, and at 8:20 p.m., they hear a woman scream. At 8:25 p.m., they hear 2 men go down to the basement. They hear the unmistakable sound of digging a shovel hitting dirt.
And they sit there, and they listen.
They don't move. Why? Why didn't they kick down that door? Was it just to protect the wiretap operation at all costs? Don't blow the cover? Or was it something darker? Did they already know that Hoda was protected? Were there orders from on high to stand down no matter what they heard?
That silence. The silence on the part of the police. Hearing a crime in progress and doing nothing. That is the sound of the system failing Elizabeth Short one last time.
And that is the reality of the Black Dahlia. Not a mystery, but a tragedy of corruption. Thank you for listening to this deep dive.
Keep questioning the narrative.
We'll see you next time.